Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us.
Barbara Lane is the author of Broken Water. It's an extraordinary true story. 11 sisters abandoned and abused reunite after 43 years and share their story. Barbara, welcome.
Well, hello there, and thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I've been excited about this.
And I met Barbara because I was lucky enough to interview her on Spotlight for work about her book. But your story is so multifaceted. So I don't know how you want to start or where you want to start, but it's so intriguing. And I know that for you, being adopted was not a good story, but it does play into what we talk about here. So
I guess the best place to start is always at the beginning. So, it might be a little repetitive, but I was born the ninth of 11 girls. So my story began then. And I would think safe to assume that the first few years of my life, though they were in poverty, were filled with love from my older sisters. I don't have any memory of my mother, so I don't know if she was just so busy with all those children. The story goes that our mother said, you take this one and you take that one, and you the older sisters took care of the younger ones. So, but they did, I think that you do have memories from when you're super young, like under 3, because I have memories of singing songs and being hugged and being loved. And so, that's when my story began. And I think that's an important place to begin because it attests to a very secure foundation of love that I had from my older sisters. Not every child gets that, but I was lucky enough to get that at a young age. So at 3, when I was 3, our mother decided that she was going to make our father leave the home, and then she ran away with a boyfriend. Now, at that particular time, 2 of the sisters were already married and out of the home. They were married at 16 and out of the home. Back then, that was quite common. But also back then, women didn't drive. They didn't have cars. And so when they moved out of the home, one was out of state. They kind of didn't know everything that was going on in the apartment where we lived, so where the rest of us lived. So anyway, our mother left, took the youngest one with her. It was a cold day in December in St. Louis. She turned off the heat and the water and sold all the furniture. Took the youngest at the time with her, my younger sister Pam, who was 7 months old, took her with her, but left the rest of us in that apartment. And we were there 3 days. And before a neighbor figured out what was going on and called the welfare department, and actually Catholic Charities came and swooped us up and put us in a Catholic orphanage where we stayed for a while. Now, my older sisters that were placed in the orphanage were terribly traumatized, you can imagine. But I wasn't, not at that point, because I was still with my sisters. I was still playing games with them and singing songs, and they would rock me to sleep and do all those wonderful things. So I didn't really care where I was. As long as I was with them, I felt fine, secure, and happy. But then my trauma occurred when we were separated, and I watched them leave the orphanage. And I didn't understand foster care. I didn't understand where they were going or why I couldn't go along. And I'd watch them leave. And there was this little mound of grass on the front yard in the orphanage where I would stand. And I was drawn to that little mound of grass. I didn't know why. I thought, well, maybe I had spent some time there with my biological mother. I don't know. But I was drawn to that mound. But then when I stood on that mound and watched all my sisters leave one by one, it just changed from a place of joy to a place of tragedy for me. So that was my trauma. Eventually, my one sister, who's 18 months older than my sister Kay, and I were placed in foster care in the same way. Now, I tell this in the book, and I always say you can't not make this stuff up. My sister Kay and I were placed in the home of a mafia grunt. You know, it entailed everything you can think of regarding a home of the mafia. And because of the dangerous personality our foster father had, his behaviors, I learned to be very quiet. It was a way, and I think kids today still do that. You know, they go in and they become quiet and withdrawn for a sense of safety, thinking perhaps if I'm quiet, they won't pay attention to me. My sister Kay took an opposite approach and became very defiant. And he was very physically abusive to both of us, but she took the brunt of it because of her way of handling our placement. You know, I think that was the birth of the caretaker in me, because I did everything in my power to protect her from him beating her or what have you. So I can kind of trace that back in my life. But that's where I think I really learned, role modeled my sister's caring for me, and I tried to protect my sister in a really volatile situation. I wasn't successful, by the way, but anyway, we grew up in that home, and there was physical, emotional, and sexual abuse in that home. And we really had no one to tell because, and I think sadly, this happens today sometimes. My foster father was very charismatic. He knew how to tell a good story. He played golf with the priest. He volunteered as an usher on church on Sundays. He coached the soccer team. God saved those little boys that he coached. God knows what occurred. But he just presented himself as this wonderful man who just protected us and loved us, so he said. My foster mother was very quiet and subservient to him. She knew everything that was going on, but just didn't ever do anything about it. She wasn't a very warm person. I don't remember hugs or anything from her. So in a lot of ways, it was pretty traditional mafia home. I don't know how else to explain it. I will say they made some really good pasta. Well, you know, that is true. They made some darn good Italian. Actually, they were Sicilian, but some very good Sicilian food. So I guess if you want to see a bright side in something, there was that. So that was kind of the beginning.
How long were you in that home?
Oh, I stayed there till I married. Yeah, I married at 19. We stayed there because we were very threatened by him. He had a gun, one that we knew of, and we were told often if we said anything or told anybody that he would shoot the other sister. So there's no way we would tell anyone anything. Now, they were very sly because right before my sister Kay turned 18, they decided to adopt us. Now, we were so, how would you say, beaten down, our will and everything. There was no way we could even say we didn't want that to happen. But the reason they did that was because once my sister Kay turned 18, she would have access to our records. We would have been able to find our sisters, and we would have known what happened or where we were going. And by being adopted in Missouri, they closed our files. Missouri has that closed file law to this day. So we were never able to look into our files to find anything. Now, I told you that my sister was pretty, how would you say, defiant of him, which resulted in a lot of physical abuse for her. And the fights, when she turned 18, they kicked her out. So she was one of those that you would say age out of the system, and then what do you do? And for some reason, I stayed there till I was 19, married my husband, and got out of what I call that hellhole. So I can just say my life, my sister's life, sadly, isn't different from many lives. I don't know how many are placed with the mafia these days, but there are wonderful foster homes. I have to put that out there. Wonderful foster parents. In my career, I've come across them, and, I praise them and honor them for what they do, and they genuinely want to help. But there are also those cases that are like mine and my sister's. And, kids in foster care rarely have anyone they can confide in that they trust, that they don't think they're going to get harmed, or they don't think they're going to get shamed. This is a big shaming thing. I mean, it's very shaming. So I think one of the things I'd like to highlight about my life in that home was I turned 14 and I was so depressed. I decided I didn't want to live anymore. So there was something very empowering about that, because I didn't care if he shot me or not. Matter of fact, I asked him, please get your gun and shoot me. I don't want to live anymore. So I thought he would. And actually, you can get that depressed in this kind of a home, because we weren't allowed to leave the home. We weren't allowed to have friends over or go to sleepovers or anything like that. We could go to the grocery store with him, or we went to the racetrack because he thought I was lucky. I could pick the horses. I don't know. But anyway, other than that, we were pretty much confined to the home. So when I told him to please to shoot me, he raised his hand up in the air like he was going to hit me. So I thought, okay. But then he put it down, and he had a look on his face that I had never seen before. And he walked out of the room, and he never bothered me again. And I think it's, if I had had the gumption at a younger age to stand up to a bully, of course I didn't, because you're so trained from 3 on up to, I don't want him to shoot my sister. I'm going to just have to tolerate all of this. But he never bothered me again. And I would like to say, at that point in time, I found some strength and some resilience that I think was rooted in the care that my sisters gave me when I was little. Because I started having friends, and I became captain of the volleyball team, and I joined the glee club. I was in plays. I just blossomed in a way in those last few years of high school that anybody on the outside would think, oh, it's just a normal kid that's enjoying high school. But I did something else that I think other kids do, is that I fantasized a lot as a child. And so I created a dungeon in my mind where I could put all these memories and lock the door and just keep them in there. But I had to be really careful to guard it all the time. But I think locking those away at that point in my time as a 14-year-old little girl was a good thing, because I was able to have some normalcy, even though I was going home to the same situation as far as being battered, because I'd get in the way when I was trying to protect my older sister. But, as far as any sexual abuse, it stopped right there. He just left me alone. So, but, I look back on it all, and I think it helps me understand the dynamics of kids who are in abusive environments. And my sister Kay and I displayed 2 different approaches to dealing with it. The rage that she showed and the quietness that I became to protect ourselves. So I understand kids, I think, because of that. So any questions?
Oh, I think it's so interesting that how the different personalities played out. And in my situation, a counselor told my sister and I one time that because we had some level of love and gentleness early on, that probably made a difference of our resilience. Even though most of the time it was really bad, but there was this tender time that we had. And so, and then, when you talk about the coping skills, and then when we become older, they don't work so well, but they're brilliant for us when we're going through it.
They're brilliant. Yes. And so I always say in my practice, I would always invite clients to view their inner child that way, because you learn to hate your inner child, right? That younger part of you, you learn to hate them. And this is what they did. And if they had done it differently, instead of saying exactly what you just said, Laurie, the brilliance of the behaviors that these children, and myself included, developed to survive. It's just brilliant is the right word. I believe that. And I think my sister Kay was brilliant in her way. and mine. So, but the one thing that stuck with me through all of this was a memory of my sisters. My sister Kay didn't carry that with her quite so much. And to this day, she has some amnesia about everything that happened in that home. So I think, though, that even at 3 and 4, I remembered all their names. I remembered their names in order of birth. I mean, I longed for them. I wanted to be with them. I just knew that where we were wasn't right. It didn't fit my 3-year-old's idea of what a home should be like or what a family should be like. So I knew instantly that was wrong.
So you remembered each and every one of them the whole time. You just had no way to find them.
I had no way. And my sisters, my eldest sister especially, would try to keep track of all of her younger siblings. And my foster parents told my older sisters when they would call that we weren't living there anymore. And he didn't know where they went. And, they didn't know, well, call the social worker. I mean, they didn't know how any of this worked. So, to them, we were kind of lost, especially Kay and I. The other ones, they kind of knew where they were, but then when they grew up, they would kind of disappear for a while. So we were all scattered in the wind, is what I say. We were just scattered in the wind. So
when you got married and left the home, did you then have any ties with them, or were you like, peace out, I'm gone?
It took a while. It took a while and a lot of therapy for me to come to terms with that he wouldn't get that gun and kill somebody, which was one of the harder things I had to come to terms with. And in therapy, I realized, well, at 14, I stood up with him and he left me alone. What would he do now? Or at that point, if I stood up to him? But it took a lot of therapy to stand up to him and break away from that fear-based chain is what I want to call it. And I did it by way of letter. I wrote him a letter because when I talked about it with my therapist, doing it face to face, I just didn't want to do that. So I wrote him a letter and told him I just didn't want him in my life anymore. And, a few other things. And he sent money to my kids to try to buy his way back into, and they all sent it back and told him they didn't want to see him, didn't, so, but it took me a while to get the courage to face up to that kind of evil because he was so evil, really evil.
So when you met your husband and got married, did you tell him about your background, about what you'd been through? And was that where you started to tell someone else your story?
When I met my husband when we were 14, and when I had my freedom, we had a bike accident. And he said some awful things about my bike. I called him a nerd. And we just started hanging out. And I don't remember when I told him what was going on. One 14-year-old telling another 14-year-old. But he always knew. I mean, he just was my confidant, my support, and I will say that he let me work my way through this the way I needed to work my way through. He would like to just go over and knock daylights out of him. I needed to come to the point to gain my strength, my maturity, to protect my own inner child, myself, and do my own separation. And to his credit, he supported me every step of that way. So we're still together. We've been together forever.
Oh, I love that. And, the reason I asked is because I think sometimes before people can get to a place of even sharing their story, they might think that they'll tell their story and then voila, they're healed. It's over.
Oh,
but
no.
yeah, we interviewed a gal named Dana who wrote a book called The Ballerina in the Box. And she stayed in relationship with her dad for many years until she finally confronted him. And that's what people looking in won't realize because they don't understand the hold and that it does take intense therapy and support to begin to break that. You don't just, you don't just break it.
No.
And you're a therapist, right? Now?
Yes. I'm a ministerial counselor. And I specialize my master's is in family psychology, and I specialize in abusive families. I mean, purely pathological, right? I mean, that's you call it what it is, but it's been a very fulfilling career for me. And I have had I get recommendations from everywhere, from psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors. They're stuck in this point or that point. Will I talk to their client? Sure. But there's a difference to me. And I chose this option for a reason. In my own healing, my therapist, Donna, was a very spiritual person, and she broke some rules as far as the therapy rules, having lunch with me, which is a no-no. It's a no-no. But she didn't do it with everybody, but she opened up to me in a way that kind of mimicked my sisters. So I had a real healthy transference for her that, I would tell her anything. And she was very, very spiritual. And she helped me challenge a lot of my own spirituality or my religious beliefs and find my own. To find my own sense of soul and who I am and what is God and what is the universe and what's it all about. She opened that up for me, along with, you can go to college. Oh, no, I can't. Yes, you can. Oh, no, I can't. I was 40 before I went to college.
Wow.
Yes. So late bloomer, but I bloomed. I blossomed well.
Yeah.
But I wanted to incorporate that in my practice. I wanted to be able to, for example, when I work with the family as a minister, they can invite me over for dinner. And I can sit with the family and I can see what the dynamics are and we can talk about it, and we can invite spirituality into healing this family. And I can go to court for a child and share what I've seen, which as a counselor, not that counseling doesn't work. I'm a big therapy advocate, but you can't do that. You really cannot do that. So I really liked I'm kind of an out of the box thinker. And I often equated, like I spent years working as a child advocate, which is out of the box, right? You're the right hand of the judge. You can go see that child anywhere, take that child anywhere. Whereas when you're the therapist, you cannot. Social workers can, but I just think it's worked beautifully for me and for my clients. So I love that part of it.
Yeah. And I love that you decided to stay in this field because seriously, when somebody's ready to tell their story, they need somebody that really gets it.
Yes.
And that's so important. And especially the trauma aspect.
Correct.
And the dungeon or the, putting things away, the fantasy, all of that. If somebody knows that, and I remember with my counselor, I would tell her something that made no sense to me, but seemed normal. And she would say to me, well, you know what that is, right? And I'd be like, no. And she would tell me, and I would be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was typical abuse. I just thought that's the way the family was. So
I know.
it's so great. Well, I want to hear the rest of the story, but Kevin, do you have any questions before we move on? Because this is just so brilliant.
Well, I was curious about, it sounds like you had a spiritual awakening as you went through therapy, but you said your father was an usher at church and so forth. Did you have a sense of spirituality before you left your family, your mafia family?
Your mafia family.
Well, yeah.
I have to go back to the age of 3. And my first spiritual experience, I guess you would call it that, was Christmas that year. Remember, it was December, a cold December when we were left. And we were in a Catholic orphanage and it had a little chapel. And that Christmas Eve, I wanted to see the baby Jesus be laid in the manger because my sisters were just building it up and talking about it. And I fell asleep in a big chair in the lobby, and I was really angry when I woke up that I missed the arrival of the baby Jesus. But when I went in, they brought me in there. When I went in there, if you can envision this, the nuns are so disciplined, right? That the tinsel was hung one by one evenly on the Christmas trees. And the nativity scene with the candles and the incense and their chanting, I melted into oneness with the whole experience. It was my first peak experience, which is, I think, what the proper word for that is, where you feel one with everything and you're part of everything. That's when the first one happened. So I carried that with me throughout my life, and it's occurred on many different occasions. But I think I hid all of that as well. And my therapist reopened that door for me, to where I remember a particular day sitting on the porch. We lived in a Victorian home in a place called Webster Groves, Missouri. And it was a beautiful spring day. And I'm sitting on the swing on the front porch. The kids are playing in the yard. And I felt the breeze. Now, let me say that again. I felt the breeze. And it was like, wow, I haven't felt the breeze. It sounds like so simple, like you feel the breeze. I'm sure I felt the breeze, but I did not feel the breeze like that. Oh my gosh, you feel that breeze? So I was coming to life, and I was in therapy when that occurred. So that spirituality just came out everywhere after that. And so that's a good question. But I think it was there. Then I blocked it, hid it, numbed myself to it. And then it just rebirthed itself in a beautiful way when I hear my kids' laughter. And, it just brought me to tears that day. I just was so thrilled that I could feel it.
Yeah. A lot of people might say this happened and I grew up in the church and they went to church, and so they might abandon everything that family would represent. But it sounds like you were able to separate the spirituality from the abuse.
Right, exactly. And from Catholicism, I am not Catholic. Of course, they don't allow women ministers and women priests, so that would never have worked. But there's some beautiful aspects to it. And the way I've worked my way through Catholicism is there is no, in my opinion, as a minister, there's no religion that owns the spiritual realm. It's for everyone. If you want to use the figure of Jesus, no one owns that figure. That is for everyone who relates and embraces that. So, I claim the saints. If I want to have a saint, I will have a saint, and I think they're available to everyone. You often hear Catholics say there are saints. And I'm like, I think, no offense, but, I can pray to St. Joseph if I want to, or Mother Mary, or, St. Patrick with the Irish and have a beer. So that all transpired. I'll tell you a funny story if you want about Catholicism. I was raised devoutly Catholic, and Mafia have quite a connection with Catholics. And during my therapy, the first time I ever thought, well, maybe I need to challenge that. My therapist says, you're opening up in so many ways. Why don't you try this little chapel around the corner, a Unitarian church? I said, what's a Unitarian church? I mean, what did I know? You're either Catholic or you're going to hell. I don't know what a Unitarian is. So anyway, she said, just go try it, see what you think. So I got all dressed up as you do. And we did, my heels, my dress, everything. Good little Catholic girl at the chapel 15 minutes early, and no one's there. And I'm like, I must have the wrong time. Meantime, I'm sweating bullets because Sister Margaret always told me the roof would fall in if you go into a church that's not Catholic. So I go out, look at the sign. I said, no, 10 o'clock. It's 10 of 10. No one's there. So I went in sweating, sit way in the back of the chapel, the very furthest, and there's no one in there. And now I'm starting to shake, like I know maybe I'm not supposed to be here. In walks this guy with jeans and a t-shirt on, holding a cup of coffee, and he goes, well, hello back there. I said, hi. He goes, what Catholic church do you come to us from? So I guess it was not unique to him. In like 3 minutes, the place was crowded. Everyone stood up and started singing Amazing Grace, and all I could do was cry and cry and cry, and they hugged me and dried my tears. And I thought, okay, so the spiritual path is one that evolves as well, where you find places that are loving and accepting and that get you, that are not real good with dogma.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. Well, I love the work that you're doing, and I am very curious. So, if I remember this right, you were number 9.
Uh-huh.
Your mom left with number 10,
Uh-huh.
and you were 43 when you finally reunited.
Correct.
So, do you want to tell us how that evolved?
Oh my gosh. So, I'm glad we're talking spirituality because for me, it was an amazing spiritual experience. We lived in Maryland, and every August when my kids were little, we rented this little condo on the boardwalk on the Delaware shore in Bethany Beach. I don't know if you're familiar with any of it. But anyway, it was August, and I was packing in my kitchen the things that I would take for that month-long stay that, just things you would use, your rice cooker or what have you. And I was thinking of my sisters because I often thought if I went somewhere that just maybe I'd bump into them because who knows where they ended up. And if someone looked a little bit like me, I would try to, manipulate a conversation to just kind of try to think about it. So anyway, I was thinking about them. And the only way I can describe it is that I felt like someone just shook me or hit me over the head with a frying pan or something. And I had this premonition, this knowingness, oh my gosh. And what I heard in my mind's eye, this is not words you hear, but what I heard, I'll just use that so I can explain it, was if you wanted to find your sisters, why didn't you just ask? Now, I have tried everything from detectives to lost family registries to reaching out to Catholic charities and never had any luck finding my sisters. So when I heard that, what came with that was a knowingness they were going to find me. I knew they were going to find me. And I also knew, like I know I'm talking to you right now, they were going to find me in 3 days. So I knew this so much, so deeply in my soul that I could hardly, get myself together. And I was trying to figure out, how am I going to tell my kids and my husband, hey, guess what? My sisters are going to find me in 3 days, without them saying, get the white coat, your mother. So anyway, I chickened out saying anything to them, except for boy, wouldn't it be nice if I ran into a sister or this or that? But sure enough, we went to the beach on the 3rd day. The 3rd morning, I got up. I knew that was the day. I just knew it. So I made breakfast for my family, left it on the table, grabbed some things and went out on the beach and waited. Shortly thereafter, because we were right on the boardwalk, right there, my husband opens the slider door of that little condo and says, Barbara, come in here. I dropped everything I knew. I went up to the door and I said, he said, sit down. I said, my sisters found me, didn't they? He said, how'd you know? So that's how it happened on my side. And that was an unbelievable experience. He had in his hand the phone number of 2 of my sisters, and I didn't know who to call first. And I'll tell you in a bit how I got those numbers. But anyway, I spent the day on the phone with many of my long-lost sisters. So how it happened on the other side, do you want to know?
Yes, of course.
Okay. My second eldest sister, Ellen, was longing to get all the sisters together. They hadn't been together. She knew if she called this one, that one might know where the other one was, and maybe they could track them all down and have a reunion. So she was talking to her son and her son's best friend about this, and she started crying. And her son's best friend, his name was Brian, said, why are you crying? He said, well, because there's 2 out there. We don't know where they are, and we're going to have this reunion. We're not going to. So he said, what do you know about them? So she said, well, they were in the newspaper once with this foster family. Get this. The newspaper article depicted the model foster family, my mafia family, and to encourage other families to be foster parents. And there we sit in this picture, like, oh my God. So she still had that. And it had the name of our foster parent, which was Pashota. So he said, can I take it? I said, yeah. Now, keep in mind, Brian had quite a criminal record. I mean, he wasn't just a straight shooting kind of guy. So he goes to St. Louis from Owensboro, Kentucky, where my sister was living. And his story is he bribed somebody somehow and got the marriage certificate for my sister Kay with her married name, her phone number, And there you go. So see, you never know. They say what the good Lord works in strange ways.
Wasn't DNA.
Yeah.
It was
No, well, there wasn't DNA back then. It wasn't out yet, you know? So, but anyway, so that's how that happened on that side. And the next day we all flew to St. Louis, those of us who could, 8 of us, I think. And I just don't know how to explain it. I just threw myself in their arms. I just threw myself. I remembered their smell, their touch, the color of their eyes. It was amazing. Wow. And we've been like little kids ever since.
And so did you find all 10? Then you said 8 of you went to St. Louis. Did you find all 10?
Yes, and 2 weeks later, we went to Kansas to the third eldest sister's home, and all of us were there. And I found out I had another sister, Cindy, number 11. Now, there's 2 more out there, because Cindy's really number 13. There's 2 more out there. And get this, one's a boy.
Oh, wow.
And we don't know where they are. I've been on Ancestry.com for years. It never turned up. And we've discussed this as sisters, like maybe in today's age we could find them, but they were adopted as infants. They were taken away from my mother and adopted as infants. I think we talked about this. I had a friend who was adopted, found out she was adopted at her mother's funeral. She never had a clue. It devastated her. She's still in therapy. So they may not know, you know, and who are we to say, oh, you've had this wonderful life, perhaps, I hope and pray, but you just don't know the history behind your family. And maybe they, you know, or if they do know, the book has been out there. It's been pretty well received. It's still selling. You know, it's the kind of thing that maybe if it's supposed to happen, it will, as much as we all would love it to happen. But we sure wouldn't want to crush them either.
Yeah. I love it that you're sensitive to that, because I also had a friend that she was raised Jewish, thought she was Jewish, learned all the Jewish religion. And at her same thing, at her mom's funeral, she found out she was Hispanic and adopted. And most of her family, you know, her had passed, but she found a sister and maybe like an uncle. But her whole life, she thought she was, you know, Jewish, born and raised Jewish. And here she, and people would always say, well, you look more Hispanic. And they would all laugh and come to find out. Yeah.
Right. Oh, it can be devastating. I hope she's okay.
Yeah, she's worked through it, and she has a great sense of humor. But yeah, and you know what an incredible story. And I think what Kevin and I get so amazed at is how every story is so different, and how there are, like you've pointed out, there are gratitude elements where you can look and say that maybe this good thing is what got you through. And
absolutely. I feel very grateful for my life in totality, actually. Not to condone child abuse or horrors, because I have to state it was a horror, living in horror, absolute horror. But that was then. I've done my work. I mean, and you're never totally complete. That brings up to, what do you pass on to your children with your history? And my kids have great sense of humor about the whole thing. And I just am open with them. Hey, listen, if you see something come out of me, just tell me, you know, because you're like my mirror, and I'll appreciate knowing, hey, Mom, you said this, did you mean it, or whatever. And they just kind of chuckle at me like, geez, you know. So, but I do think that things can slip out in ways that you yourself won't recognize. And so I view myself as constantly in therapy. I have friends who are therapists, and I banter with them all the time. What do you think? Is this, what that, you know? Sadly, my therapist passed away a year ago last May, as with my mentor, passed away in 2008. But they left me such gifts that I just don't know how to describe it. My mentor, David Grove, taught me Grovian therapy. I actually trained with him for many years. It's epistemological metaphor, where incredibly effective when you're working with survivors of childhood abuse. Because as a child, you fantasize, right? Or you think, you know, that top in the corner, your little top you were playing with, you're seeing it spinning. The theory holds that you incorporate that into your internal being. And through to metaphor therapy, you tend to ask very what they call clean language questions, like when you feel this way, where? Normally it's in the tummy, right? And what's it like? Doggone if it doesn't come out to be, feels like a top spinning. So you externalize that, which is incredibly healing. But then that top, when you're working with the inner child of someone, can have an awful lot of power. What would that top like to do when that top can hit that person over the head or spin you away from the danger? I mean, it sounds juvenile, and it is, because you're dealing with a much younger age. So I trained with him for 20 years. It's a very spiritual process too, because it always gets down to the soul. It always does, or, God or whatever concept that individual has for that. So that was a terrible loss when he died. I mean, you can Google him, Clean Language, David Grove. There's still some of his lectures on YouTube, but what a genius. So I was blessed to have two incredibly genius individuals into my life through my healing. So I just had to mention them. I honored them.
Awesome. Wow. What an incredible story.
Yeah.
I always talk really fast, so sometimes I don't give Kevin a chance. So Kevin, I see you're like, I can see his wheels spinning. Do you have some final questions?
I just so excited that you got to meet your sisters, but it sounds like they met you through Kay. Were you in touch with Kay throughout this time?
Kay and I were always in touch. Yeah, well, there was a period of time when they kicked her out. I didn't have a car. I didn't know where she was. I didn't know where she lived. And when I got married, one of the cousins in that family came up to me and said, now that you're out of that home, which tells me that she could tell what was going on to a degree, I want you to know where Kay is. So we got right back together and been together ever since. We're still close. I talked to her this morning. So she still struggles a lot because she can't remember what occurred to her. But I think maybe she has a wise soul that's protecting her that way.
Yeah, I think we do react differently. I know my brother and I have different memory as far as, how much I remember compared to how much he remembers and so forth. And I think and part of it is that protection that we have when we're going through that. And depending on what age we're at, you can react differently.
We've wondered about that sometimes because I remember when I first started remembering, I wanted it all. Give it all to me now. And then I recognized as I got healing, maybe I don't want, if the holes that are still there, maybe I just don't even want to know.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And so I always feel, Donna used to tell me an unhealed soul teaches many lessons. So, maybe that's their life path. If they're not healed in the way we think they should be healed, they're teaching lots of lessons. So to just kind of embrace that. Yeah. So, and I don't think you're going to remember things that maybe, I think the soul is really wise and will know the timing and the extent of what one should remember to heal and be happy and feel the breeze,
Yeah.
Well, and to have the family, to have the sisters and the love that you talk about, I think that goes such a long way.
Absolutely.
Often we hear of people that come out and they lose their family because they're not believed. So for you to all have each other and know that you're loved and believed, I think that goes such a long way.
Right. And the thing that I think has empowered us sisters so much as our stories came out, I developed, when I took the 15 years to gather all their stories and spent time with sister after sister to learn there wasn't one of us that escaped sexual abuse. Not one out of 11 girls. And I wasn't free to tell the other that this one, interestingly, the sisters that are left didn't know the other sisters' stories until the book was published. Wow. That's how hard it is to speak about, how hard it is to come to terms with. But boy, has there been some healing done since this book came out. So it achieved its purpose.
Nice. That's so amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin always has a final question.
Okay.
Well,
let me get geared up.
I'd like to ask, when we have people who have been, through something like what you've gone through,
Mm-hmm.
if you would have anything you could say to someone who's listening that may have gone through something similar or has other, what would you want to tell them?
I think that it's really helpful to understand shame being external, toxic, and internal, healthy. Abused children grow up with unhealthy shame, which is external to the self, and that's toxic. And they think it's internal, right? They think it's within them, but it is truly external. It is put upon them, and they carry it like a backpack, right? So understanding the difference between external shame, which you had nothing to do with, it is not your fault. You did not cause it. And internal shame, which is healthy, like if you said something mean to someone, you went, oh, I'm so sorry I did that. We all have that. We need that. We need that for society to exist properly. But what happens, it gets enmeshed. We think that shame is just all a bad thing. And then we can't sort through it and externalize that toxic shame. And the way you do that, in my opinion, is through help. You get therapy. Reach out to a counselor, a therapist. If the first one doesn't work, find another one. You will find the right fit to learn to get that heavy backpack off your back and put it on the person it belongs to. Doesn't belong to you. Get help, and it's hard. First time I did, I was shaking, I was sweating, I was scared, silly. But, you have to have the strength of a warrior, and you deserve to win that battle for yourself. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's so good.
That is.
Thank you.
What we have also found that that's one of the things that makes it so hard for anyone to talk about for the first time is the shame that we carry, that, like you say, we don't deserve. We didn't earn that shame, but it was put upon us.
Right.
And so to break that barrier of shame and have the bravery to tell about it is what we wish for everyone who's listening.
Exactly. And as people, healing realize, you could talk about that shame because that shame is not you. That is not who you are. That is something you were forced to carry. I like the metaphor of a backpack for myself because you can take it, can get so heavy, but a backpack is not you. It's filled with things that are not you. You can put that down.
Yeah, so often some of the guests we've had who have talked about it have talked about how it's like this burden is lifted off them when they finally speak their truth and what happened to them. And it is that backpack they're taking off that's full of that weight that's upon them.
Right.
And I think one of the important things we like to tell them is you've already been through the hardest. You've already been through the worst. Yeah. It takes a lot of courage to get to the point of talking about and sharing your secrets, but you've already been through the worst and you survived.
Yeah.
So you can do it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Barbara Lane's book is called Broken Water, 11 Sisters Abandoned and Abused and Reunited After 43 Years. And she has compiled and shared all their stories. It's on Amazon. Go get it. It's a great book.
Thank you, Laura.
So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
I'd ask you to close your eyes. If you're comfortable, take a deep breath. If you're close to the other person, you can hold their hand or imagine that you are. And as you breathe, we invite in the healing power of the universe, whatever that means, to each of us, and feel the peace and love and safety within, and extend that out to our friends, our family, community, and the wider world. And I would ask that you add to this now.
Father, I thank you for all your blessings, and I just pray for Barbara and her sisters for your continued blessing in their lives, and that they would be filled with joy in the way that they are able to spend time together and to be blessed by each other, Lord. And I just pray that people would be inspired by her book to be present and find the healing in their lives, Lord, and to have the courage to find healing. And Lord, I just pray for her clients as well, that I'm thankful someone who, like her, has been through it, is able to help those families that need the help and need healing, and that she is able to provide for them and have the empathy of knowing what they're going through. Lord, and I just pray you would continue to bless her work. In your name I pray.
And thank you for this amazing visual of a backpack, that we do not have to carry this shame, and that there is hope and there is help. And thank you for Barbara and her story, and her loving spirit, her gratitude. And it just shines such a light that there is healing and that there is life after horrendous abuse and after difficult childhoods. That, it doesn't make it okay or doesn't condone, but that we can find peace and happiness and joy. And I thank you for that. Amen.
Amen. God bless you.